Nevercenter, we'll model the blade. The blade consists of the point, the central ridge, and the fuller. We also need to model the so-called rain guard, and this is no part of the blade, but the rain guard is part of the cross guard, and this is something to hide the transition between the blade and the cross guard. At first we want to start blocking out the blade. In the options menu of the cube I changed the values so we can start from an ashlar. Then I select the horizontal edges and split them via the split loop command. Now we bevel it to double this edge loop. After that we select all vertical edges and split them. We can move this newly created loop via the slide command. Here we select a new face loop via the select loop command and scale it to 0.3. To create the point of the sword, we are moving the face that is situated at the bottom in the middle of the ashlar downward. We've created this edge loop to define the form of the lower part of the sword more clearly. Keep in mind that you should slide the loop if you want to move it, otherwise you might change the form of the sword. Here we select two edges and scale them inward because we want to make the lower part of the sword a bit rounder. Finally, we want to bevel this loop because we want to have more control in this area below in the base mesh. Here you can see the subdivided version. It's nearly the same, just a bit smoother. Select the edges in Z direction and split them. Now we select this face loop and delete it. And to select the other separated faces, we are selecting one face and then hit expand selection and delete them. This time we use the mirror tool to mirror the blade in -Z direction. We want to make the blade a little bit thinner, that's why we are selecting this face loop and moving it towards the mirroring seam. We have a quick look at the point to see if everything's alright, and now we continue working on the upper part of the blade. You can see the blade is too thin in the upper part, that's why we are moving the edge outward. Now we extrude the upper part of the blade to make this area look harder in the subdivided mode. Finally, we want to add another edge loop to mark the end of the fuller. The length of the fuller is approximately 2/3 the length of the whole sword. Now we've prepared the sword to add more details. In the next part we'll create the fuller and we'll harden the central ridge. To create the fuller, we bevel this polygon and scale it via inset scale. The edges of the fuller need to be hardened, so we apply a bevel on the inner face that we've already scaled. Now we select all outer edges of the fuller, and of course we are selecting the edges that lead to the inner part of the fuller because we want to have this part more angular, we want to have it less rounded, and don't forget to select the edge on the bottom of the fuller. And now we apply a bevel on these edges as well. Because of the beveling there have been created new triangles. You can get rid of them if you select the edges and hit merge. We want to create edges that help us controlling the form of the sword. Therefore we select all vertical edges in the fuller area and split them via split loop. Now we bevel this loop and slide these newly created edge loops to the ends of the fuller. The best thing is to create the sword without having triangles or n-gones in visible areas. So we use the cut tool to split this 6-sided polygon into two 4-sided polygons. We don't want our sword starting directly with the fuller. That's why we're extruding the upper faces, and afterwards we extrude and inset scale these faces again to create the effect of a slight bevel. The lower part of the fuller is rounded, and that's exactly what we wanted. But if we take a closer look at the topology in this area, then we'll see that there's something missing to create a more defined topology. For this purpose, the easiest thing is to split the vertical edges again and create another edge loop and slide this edge loop upward. The loop which we added in this area helps us to create the starting point for the central ridge. Now we want to harden this central ridge. Select two neighboring faces in the same way you would select a face loop, but select also a third one to define the end of the path. To select all faces of this path, use the select loop command. Finally, we scale the polygons of the central ridge to create this hard look. In the end, I want to change something that is my personal opinion. I think the symmetry loop in the middle of the sword makes the edge look a little bit too sharp. Actually, a sword is not that sharp as a knife, so that's why I'm deleting it. In this last part of the tutorial, we want to bring all parts of the sword together that we've already modeled. Therefore, we click on File, Load into Scene to load the whole grip. Now we move the grip into position. The blade is a bit too small, so I need to scale it in X direction. Now we want to create the rain guard. It needs to line up correctly with the blade, so the foundation of it should have the same amount of points as the blade already has. That's why we beveled this loop, scale these edges outward, and extrude these three polygons afterwards. We are moving the grip down to adjust the edges and the polygons of the rain guard. And we also want to pay more attention to the form of the blade. For example, we adjust the size of the middle polygon to the size of the fuller. You can also change the size of the edges to adjust the polyflow. If we subdivide the model, you can see that it's quite smooth, and there's no need to say that we don't want to have it, so we select the lower edges and we bevel them. Don't forget to merge the triangles that have been created after the beveling. And I guess you are aware of the polygons at the upper part of the rain guard, so let's extrude these polygons and inset scale them. Maybe you've noticed that though we have no symmetry edge, the mirror mode is still working fine. The rain guard have been finished, and we can take a look if the rain guard and the blade line up correctly. If everything's alright, we can slide and move some more edges to adjust the polyflow in different areas of the crossguard. Now we can bring both parts together, and therefore we use the combine command. If you attach the sword to the hand of a character, then it would probably grab the blade. That's why we want to change the location of the manipulator, and we can do this by switching on the manipulator edit mode and moving it towards the grip. We switch off the manipulator edit mode cause we finished the bastard sort. Now you've learned to use hard surface modeling methods in Xylo 2, and I hope this tutorial was useful for some of you, so thanks for watching and happy modeling.